Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion. Well, of course, we are very pleased to be joined this evening by our next guest from the I Can't See You podcast, David Goldstein. How are you, by the way? And as I start every episode of Aaron's Opinion, I'll start this one just the same as all the others by saying welcome. And as you know, my question that I've been asking every guest from around the world: who is David Goldstein? You can take the interview and conversation in any direction you can imagine. Dig in.
Aaron, I am great today, and I hope you're well also. I am evidently now I've learned significantly older than you, a 57-year-old guy living in suburban Philadelphia. I was born with congenital glaucoma. I am an entrepreneur. I've owned several businesses throughout my life. I have always loved communications, went to college for it in Miami, and thought I would do something in the communications field. And obviously now I am with my I Can't See You podcast. So it's just been, things have been difficult, obviously, as you know, with vision issues. And I've been legally blind for the last 15 years or so. Have had 18 surgeries. The most recent one was a cornea transplant last week. And the 12th of April, depending on when this might not be last week when it airs. And that's basically me. I love talking about business. I love helping folks out. I currently have a digital marketing agency that primarily helps build stuff for my family, content sites and things like that. But I also help folks both within the NFB chapter that I'm in here in suburban Philadelphia, the Keystone chapter, and a couple of other friends. I'm working on a website now from your listeners might know that Real Blind Tech Show I'm actually part of their fantasy football league and fantasy hockey league. And that was a lot of great fun. There was a Yahoo documentary about us the beginning of last football season, which was a lot of fun to be together with everyone. It was the first time most of the folks in the league had gotten together and met face to face. Obviously, two of the folks in that league had met plenty of times. They worked together, and but even one of the co-hosts of that show had never met the other two face to face. So I thought that was very interesting, and that was a lot of great fun. The fantasy football draft up in New York, and that's pretty much me in a nutshell. There's a lot of other things that I could get into, but I love sports. That's the other thing. And as you know, if anybody loves sports and has a vision issue, doesn't go great together when you either try to play it or try to watch it.
Sure. Well, David, I'm glad that you posted your podcast in the excuse me, guys. I'm glad that you posted your podcast in the Keystone chapter list. By the way, that's how I found it. I joined a lot of NFB lists from around the country, and I scour through the subject lines, and I don't know. I just saw the word podcast in the subject. That's why it's so important to put clear subjects, because that directed me to your podcast, and I loved it. And you know what? I'm so appreciative that you put it in the list, because I never would have known of you. I never would have known of the great podcast that you have,
right. Well,
and your sense of humor, and just the way that you the way that you really want to talk to people on that thing. That's really really. I appreciate it, because I wish there were more I Can't See You podcasts. I wish there were more Aaron's Opinions, David's Opinions. We really need to be doing this around the community as blind people. This is a project of great necessity as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And I've been pushing some folks both within the Keystone chapter and outside and helping them get started. I'm involved in another podcast called White Canes Connect that's from the NFB of Pennsylvania, that was the brainchild of my friend Lisa, also from the Keystone chapter. She started talking to me about some things, and I said, Lisa, you're talking about a podcast. And I've been pushing her. She's got a great voice, and she's great at interviewing. And I said, look, why don't you do one? And when she was telling me about this other thing for the NFBFPA, I thought, you're talking about a podcast. Why don't you start it? And she's like, well, okay, well, would you help me? And I said, sure. And I always push folks to get started, because everybody does have their own voice, and it's got to be heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. Usually I say this at the end when we're off here, but I'll say it now just because it fits in so beautifully. Hey, if you know anyone who is shy about podcasting or wants to be a guest or wants to interview me, you can definitely give out my contact information because I love, 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 love helping other podcasters build up their content around the community. And for me, knowing that I'm able to help someone else get into podcasting, get their feet wet, get used to interviewing, I would love to help you with that. So any people that they're welcome. They are welcome here on Aaron's Opinion.
Okay.
So seriously, yeah, that's important because a lot of people, David, think that they're just too shy, or they think that they don't have a voice, or they're just too nervous, to get behind the microphone. Now, as for me, you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's
well, as far as so. Oh, we'll get to that at the end. So a little bit more about me. My name is Aaron. I'm 30. I'm 30 years old, and my academics are in the field of international relations. And I'm a teacher. I teach English online as a second language, and I got into podcasting because I felt that there just were not enough strong podcasts in the community where people can come and share their opinions. So I've been doing this for a couple of years. Yeah. So what would you say are some of your key issues that you want to discuss about the world, and what are some of the key things going on in your I Can't See You podcast?
It's funny that you talk about that. We were talking, I was talking yesterday. I had a 1-week follow-up appointment with my surgeon yesterday, and I was standing in the lobby, and my most recent podcast episode that actually dropped today, the 22nd of April, is about that. This guy comes up to me, and we live about 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia. And so when we got to the appointment, my wife sat down and I stood because I like standing. I don't mind standing. I'm okay with it. I can stand for hours. Before COVID, we would go to concerts and you stand sometimes. If it's a large bill, it might be 4 or 5 hours, and we're happy standing for the whole thing. But I'm standing there, and a guy walks towards my wife, and my wife gets up to give him the chair. He's an older guy. And he then walks over to me and stands in front of me. And he said, "There's an open chair there you can sit in." And I said, "No, I'm okay. Thank you." And at this point, I was on the phone with someone. And he said, "No, go ahead. You can sit because you're a Blink." And I said, "What?"
What?
I said, "I'm a Blink. Is that what you said?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what's a Blink?" He said, "A blind person."
I said, "How does Blink mean blind person?"
I've been thinking about that ever since he asked that, because I have no idea everybody blinks. So I don't get it. I just don't get it.
I just love that. I just love that. That is so hilarious.
So are you saying that every time a sighted person blinks, they're blind for a second? That's I don't know. I don't know what he means. I've never heard it before. And it just made me laugh. And he again said, "Go ahead, have a seat." And I said, "Listen," I said, "my legs are fine. It's my eyes that don't work. I'm good standing. You go have a seat." And he walked away. And the person on the phone with me, another blind person, is laughing hysterically at listening to this back and forth with me and this guy. His name was Bill, by the way. And so she's like, "That's the best answer I ever heard." And again, it's true. Not all blind people want to stand for hours on end, but I'm okay with it. I've worked in retail. I've had businesses where it was retail, and I might work for 12 hours in a row, mostly standing and helping people in my salon equipment showroom when we had that, or at my video store back in the day. So it's not any big deal for me. And the main goal of my podcast is to show folks like this guy, Bill, who just don't seem to understand what blindness is. First of all, I don't know what Blink means and why you need another name. There's something else that I like to say, when somebody says, "Oh, you're blind," and I'll say something like, "No, I can't effing see," and I'll use the word.
Right. And
that kind of stops them if it's somebody who may be thinking that they're doing me a favor by talking to me. And the whole point of my podcast is to get folks who are sighted to understand that blind folks can do just about everything that they can do. It might be differently, but we can do it and get the job done. And that's the whole reason I started podcasting. And I'm actually later this year, I'm going to, because I like business so much and I love talking about business, I actually have another segment that I'm starting to ramp up, that I'll have another episode per week that will, instead of being like my typical shows now, will be based on blind folks who have businesses or professionals that are basically out and about in the community doing, again, what other sighted folks in the community do. And they can run a business, they can be a lawyer, they can do all that stuff. I'm not saying I'm going to go interview somebody, a blind bus driver, because at this point that doesn't really exist. But a lot of the other things, folks have to see that blind folks can do these things. And for the folks who are blind who listen, it'll give them the inspiration to go, hey, that guy can do it, so can I. And that's the other bottom line, is to get folks who can't think, who can't figure out, hey, I'm blind, I can't do this, to show them that yes, you can. Just because you're blind, that's not the issue. And when I was going in for my surgery last week, I also have psoriatic arthritis. And when I'm walking into the hospital to have the surgery, I'm thinking, I really can't see that well right now, especially now. And my visual acuity before the surgery was finger counting at a foot. I ached so much, and I thought, I really wish I was coming in here to get the pain from all my joints that were killing me that day, get that taken care of. And unfortunately, that's not doable. But I did have the surgery, and hopefully my vision will get back. It was somewhere between 2,300 and 2,400 when it started to go bad over the last six or 8 months. So it's just funny that you have to look, and a lot of people have multiple things going on with them. And again, when I was younger, I thought the vision thing was the worst thing, and it certainly isn't now, because I know that I can do a lot of things with the limited vision that I have. And but there are days when I wake up and my knees and my feet and my ankles and everything hurts, and I don't want to do anything. It doesn't matter whether I could see or can't see, because I'm just going to sit around or stand around and play with my dog, and hope that the Advil or the Tylenol or whatever kick in, and so I can move a little bit better. And the vision thing is, to me now, not as important as, like I said, the psoriatic arthritis.
Sure. That's really interesting. People have said over the years some very, very strange things indeed. I've been podcasting for a few years, as I said. I've been alive for 30. I'm 30 years old now. I've heard some very strange things, but that story you just relayed to me about that hospital scene, that really is some of the strangest. That's some of the strangest things I've ever heard in my life. Like, what?
Right.
I think it really goes to show how badly society needs us as podcasters, really. I think it shows that there are still a large group of people in society who are, quite frankly, pretty ignorant to the issues of the world and to blind people.
Right. I mean, definitely, they just, for whatever reason, they just don't get it. And again, that's why I started my podcast. I was out with some friends, and somebody was telling me to go see a guy over, I don't know, about 15, 20 feet away. And he's like, which guy? And my friend says, he's right over there. And I said, are you pointing to somebody over there? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I can't see that guy. You either take me over there or get him and bring him over to me, and I'll be happy to talk to him. But you pointing and directing me isn't really what's going to get it done. And as far as strange things people have said, when I had the beauty salon equipment business, I had called up and I had asked for an electronic version of their catalog. I had called one of our manufacturers that we were a distributor for. And at the time, they weren't releasing it to everyone. You had to call in and ask for it. And at that point, they weren't even advertising that they had one. And I called in and I said, "Do you have an electronic version of this, whether it's in a spreadsheet format, a PDF, whatever?" And I said, "I can't see the catalog you guys sent me." And the catalog was very thick, probably 600, 800 pages with all sorts of different options and things like that. And she said, "Oh, didn't you get the catalog?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I got it." I said, "But I can't see it. I'm blind." And she, "Oh, you don't sound blind." And I started laughing and I said, what does that mean? I just so strange. Uh, and again, with everyone else, and sometimes you have to almost bite your tongue when somebody tries to quote unquote help you, whether you're out on the street, and you can't react in a negative way because then that reflects badly on all of us. You have to,
you know what? And I just want to interject right here. Thank you for I'm a young person, so thank you for reminding me of that lesson. And that's something that I struggle with in places that I'm sure you struggle with it too, in airports and many other types of places like that. Many types of places of bureaucracy, I struggle, and it's just, you know, I do have a temper, and that's the problem. Is I know that if I lose my temper, then I've lost the argument. That's the problem. But then the other person's behavior is so poor that I don't know what to do. So then it's just tremendously difficult for me, and I've been blind my entire life.
Okay.
Know? So it's not just because, you know, you're recently blind, as you say, from a few years back, which, of course, because I was born blind with glaucoma, I struggle to understand that.
I mean, I've been visually impaired my whole life.
Oh,
I mean, it's
okay.
not, I've been visually impaired. Most of my surgeries, out of the 18, the first 10 or so were done when I was a toddler or an infant.
Oh, so you have been blind.
Yeah, I was low vision as a kid. And it's, you know, with the glaucoma coming along, it's just taken its toll. And then, as you probably know, other things start to crop up. I had a detached retina, which is the worst surgery on the face of the planet.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that part, but thanks to God, I also say luckily I don't have that problem, but I'm sorry you do.
I mean, you know, and then the cornea thing and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, just the trauma to my eye over the course of my life. And to be honest, when things really started to go bad around 20 years ago, I was mad that I wasn't more prepared for what was coming. I knew my whole life it was coming. I would always go into my ophthalmologist, who was a family friend. So I would see him both in an office or at a Flyers hockey game or wherever. And I would say, hey, is there anything new? Is there anything that's going to help me get my sight back, get better sight? And he's like, "No, we're just going to maintain it. It's going to be fine. You're going to maintain it." And obviously that was always the goal. And I knew that. And I also was aware that more than likely, as time went on, it was going to slowly go away or quickly, and whichever path it took. But I knew it was going to fade away. And when I finally started to get mobility training around 15 or 20 years ago, I thought, why wasn't I more prepared for this? I was in a resource room in elementary school for blind and visually impaired kids. And then in middle school, I was in a regular classroom as well. I split my time. But then in middle school, I thought, you know, I want to try and be on my own as much as I can. And there was a resource room available, and I did go to it, but not as often. I always wanted to try and do and be with sighted kids. And I've always been fairly independent, and I always am game for trying something, whether it's going someplace new on a train, on a plane, whatever. And I like to show folks. I was at an event in State College, Pennsylvania at the beginning of March, and one of the people with us has only been blind about 6 years, and she's young. She's a little older than you, 32, 33, something like that. And it's a horrible story how she lost her sight. And she said, "This is the first time I'm going on a train since I've been blind." As far as she's been on a train locally on the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, SEPTA, but she'd never been outside of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia area on a train, getting on Amtrak with luggage. Obviously, she's, been on a trolley or a train in Philadelphia, and she was a little nervous by it.
Sure.
And she has a young daughter. And I said, look, it's fine. If you've done the one, you could do any of them. And if you've done a train, you can do a plane. The only thing I haven't tried yet is to go to a foreign non-English speaking country without anybody being with me. I've done, again, like you've been on planes. Oh, you have?
I've done that. Yeah, because I'm a French speaker, so French is my second language. So I've been to France before. I stayed alone in France for a couple a month. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can tell you that the impression I'm getting is that people in France and other countries, but of course, guys, we know that we have listeners to both of our podcasts all over the world, so definitely comment below on your opinions eventually here. But I have always found that people in other countries seem to be a lot more understanding and much kinder about disabilities in other countries. However, the opportunities that exist and the expectations for the people who are disabled are far less. So it's like here we expect more of people who are blind, and over there in other countries, they seem to expect less. So that can be hard. I think if you're a blind person that doesn't speak French or you only speak English, then you can go to Amsterdam, England. England is a lovely place to be. The culture is it's a very interesting place. It's a wonderful place to be. So yeah.
One thing I noticed talking about England, my daughter did her study abroad a few years ago, and actually
where did she go?
She went to Regent's University in London.
Oh, okay.
And so every year as she was growing up and going to school, we would take her to school in the morning and pick her up at night. So when she went to London, my wife and I flew over with her and dropped her off. Obviously, it was an excuse for us to get to the UK. And one thing that I noticed, and then at the end of the term, we picked her up, and I'll tell you that story in a second, but we were walking through Piccadilly Circus in London. And unlike in New York, where she lives and where she went to school, people, when I was walking, whether I was with my wife or my daughter or walking on my own, people didn't get out of my way as they do, surprisingly, in New York. Almost like a horror movie. If anybody's familiar with Godzilla walking down the street and somebody panicked in fear with with their arms up in the air and wide-eyed and not knowing if they should go to the right or go to the left. And I was with my daughter once with that, and she was cracking up at this guy as we were crossing a street, and this guy didn't know what to do as we were coming. In London, they would walk right into me and like it was nothing. And but I do find that at least in London, folks were, again, trying to be helpful. And that's a great thing for folks to try and be helpful to blind people. The thing that you don't want to do to somebody, that you don't want to force yourself on them. If somebody says, no, thank you, just say, okay, thanks, and move on, and maybe wish them good luck and move on. But it's hard to imagine some of the things. We were on the elevator the other day going for my recheck at the hospital in Philadelphia, Wills Eye Hospital. And the floors announced when you got to the floor, 7th floor going up. And I thought, oh, wow. And I knew that I could do this one on my own without having to stop and make sure, reach your hand out of the elevator and feel for the number off to the right side. And I said to my wife, because I had gone to an appointment a couple days before my surgery on my own, and I said that it was so nice that it was like that, instead of just hearing a ding and wondering, hey, is this the right floor? Because maybe I was on the elevator by myself or whatever. But yeah, as far as traveling, I'd love to pick your brain about France. And
well, I'm not stopping you. Pick it.
So in France, did you stay just around Paris, or did you go down to the south?
Funny you mention it. I've never been to Paris. Never been there in my life. So I'm a French speaker who's never been to Paris. So I went to a small city. Okay. The city is called Montpellier. And Montpellier.
Oh, down in the south, in the center. That's a great college town. And
well, how did you know that? Well, whose business is it? You don't even speak French.
I don't speak French. Un peu. Again, because of my psoriatic arthritis, one of the things that I would love to do is to move to the Mediterranean coast.
Right.
Don't care if it's Spain, France, or Italy. And I would consider Greece, but I want to be someplace where you can get on a train and go just about anywhere on the continent within a couple of hours. If you go to the south of Spain, if you go to the Costa del Sol, maybe you can't get there in a couple of hours, but it's still a flight away to France or Germany or wherever, the UK. So I've been looking, and I actually today, I don't know if there's a show on HGTV called House Hunters International.
Oh yeah.
And Adrienne Leeds is the one. She's the primary person in France that shows the folks around, whether it's Nice or Paris. She doesn't always do other cities, although I saw one where I don't remember if it was Menton, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, or somewhere else. It wasn't Nice. It was along the coast, along the Riviera. And
there's literally, it could have been hundreds of little towns.
Right. And exactly. And there's so many great little spaces. And I would love to move there. The problem for me, is property is too expensive on the French Riviera. Montpellier, or going further west, even I guess going even a little further east, you could go to Marseille, not quite as glamorous and glitzy as Nice or Monaco or any of those other little small places along the Côte d'Azur, but still some place that would be nice to go to. And so I always thought Montpellier would be a great place to take a look at. And we were considering going in September to this event that Adrienne Leeds had put together. And it's just way too expensive. But I would love to go and just go from one end to the other along the Mediterranean coast, find a place that would be suitable. The medical stuff there is both in France and Spain, top notch. Italy, maybe not quite as much, but I would love to be along the coast there, where I could walk on the beach and walk in a town where everything is very walkable. And that's one thing where I am now in suburban Philly. Until a few years ago, we lived in a place, it was 1.5 miles, 2 miles just to get on public transportation. And it was a road that didn't have a sidewalk to get half the way there. And I struggled to stay on the correct side of the white line instead of wandering into traffic, because there wasn't really any space to move. And I've always wanted to be in a place where I could go on my own and do things on my own. If my wife is at work or doing something else, whatever, I want to be able to do that. And that's the whole thing. So you flew in actually. So did you fly into Montpellier, or do you go to Nice? How do you get from where you are to there?
Well, there's a lot of ways to get to Montpellier. Let's see. I think the first time I went to Montpellier, I've been to France several times. So the most recent time, my father and I and mother, we all go as a family usually. So we went to Nice. But when we did go to Nice, we flew from Washington to Germany, and then Germany to Nice.
Okay.
But then when we flew to Montpellier, I remember we flew Washington to De Gaulle, and De Gaulle to Montpellier.
Okay.
France, once you're there, France is for a country that people wouldn't necessarily associate with being a large country, it's actually a pretty big place. And you can't, there are trains, but it's not quite as fast as we would think. It's more of a journey than you would actually realize to go from one end of the country to the other. So it's quite a distance, actually.
Right. I've been there a few times. We've been there, and my wife and I did the TGV from Paris to Nice, going through Lyon.
Oh, and wow.
And that there was a great story there too.
Well, tell it. Go.
It's funny because for most of our lives before we had kids, when we travel, we would do one of those tours where you see 27 countries in 5 minutes tours. Hey, there goes Germany. Hey, there's Luxembourg. Hey, there's this. So one of the first trips that we did on our own outside of an organized trip was this one to Paris in, I want to say, probably about 30 years ago now. And we stayed some time in Paris. We had hoped to see some of the Tour de France. We were there in July. And we went from, like I said, from Paris down to Nice for a few days on the TGV. And when we got to Nice, we were staying at this hotel called the Negresco, right along the Promenade des Anglais. And there is a group of people outside just standing around looking at the front doors. And we're, trying to weave through these people. We go and we check in and we're wondering what's going on. We go up to our room, drop our bags, and then go back out to get something to eat. And again, wade through this group of people and we're wondering what's going on. And as we're walking to get lunch, we notice a poster on this display somewhere along the sidewalk or whatever. And it said Genesis and whatever the date was when they were going to be playing. And I forget where the stadium was. It was outside of town. So I thought, I said, that'd be great to go see them. So when we got back to the hotel and again, waded through the people, we went to the concierge and we said, hey, how much are tickets to this show? Is it, it's so hard to get to. It's outside of town. It's hard to get it. It's of course before Uber, hard to get a taxi from, it would be easy to get to the event. It was at some stadium outside of Nice. It might've been outside of Monaco. I don't remember. And I said, as this guy is looking up for tickets, I want to say they were the equivalent of $90. And I said, that's not terrible, but, we love the band Genesis. It was back in their heyday and whatnot. And I said, what were all those people doing outside the hotel earlier? And now, the band is staying here. And so we thought, that's really cool. So we're staying in this hotel with this band. And I thought, okay, it'd be cool to see them. But, we're walking through the hotel. We never see them. We go out to the beach the next day. And this beach in front of the hotel is a private beach just for the hotel, directly in front. There's a public beach right next to it. And when we walked out onto the private beach area and my wife looked to the left, there was just this horde of people just standing there looking towards this private section. And I said to my wife, I said, what's going on? And I said, look around and see if anybody's here from the band. And sure enough, she started spotting them all around this area. And it was just very cool to be. And so now whenever we hear them on the radio, hey, do you remember when we sat on the beach in Nice with them? And all of my friends know the story. And it was just a lot of fun. And to cut the story short, we never got tickets to the show. So we didn't see, the only time we saw them was on the beach.
But that's even cooler. That's an even cooler story. That's a far more interesting story. So
right, than going to the concert, right?
That's better than the concert. Man, seeing them in their private, that's cool.
Right, right. And they were there with their kids. Some of them had kids. One of them had this camera, and I'm sure he was taking pictures of the topless girls. And it was just awesome to be there and watching them interact with, within their families or with their friends.
That is really, you're going to laugh. I really have no idea who that group is, but the fact is, I'm not a big music buff really.
Okay.
But still, that still fascinates me. And that's still that's so special, that is a really interesting experience to see when you travel. You have interesting experiences.
Right.
Of course, everything, every day can be an interesting experience, whether you travel or not. But yeah, that is incredibly fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Do you talk about that experience on I Can't See You?
As you were saying that about traveling and doing things, my thoughts have, since I started the podcast a few years ago, I always think that even if something doesn't go great and it's even bad, at least I have something to talk about on my podcast. And that was the main reason for starting it. Again, it's not one that is focused for it. It's to show that the blind folks can do things, and sometimes bad things happen. I've always, knock wood, it hasn't happened yet, but I always, when I get on a train or a bus, I know one day I'm going to get on one and it's not going to go to where I thought it was going. I know it's going to happen. I just know. I was at a museum a few weeks ago.
I listened to the episode. Yeah.
Okay.
The
Uber, right?
The Uber thing, the wrong, slightly confused with the wrong Uber. You know what though? Let me just preface this by saying, I'm really glad that it turned out the way that it did. Because no, seriously, David, because there have been a lot of stories about people getting into Ubers with like a crazy driver that hurts them,
right?
Or
right.
Or they get into a horrific accident, and so trust me, that was a little little creepy, but that could have gone way worse.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I realized, and I'm going.
Sorry, I didn't mean to just completely disassemble the whole experience there.
Oh, no.
Go ahead and summarize it. I just knew it because I listened to that episode and I remembered you mentioning it. So
yeah,
you're at the museum and
I'm at the museum, and I was doing some work with a group that we help out, and I love doing it because it's making museums and public places like that more accessible to folks who can't see. And whether they're visually impaired or blind, there's a lot of things. Some of the museums here in Philadelphia, and this museum happens to be the Museum of the American Revolution, which is a very cool place right in Old City, Philadelphia, right down the street from Independence Hall and around the corner from the Liberty Bell. So I was doing this. They're working on a tactile map for the museum. And we got done, and I'm talking with one of the people who's in charge of who works for the company that is helping the museum. And she's talking to me, and I'm trying to order the Uber, and I'm in this vestibule, and I click to my house. I tap on my home address, and everything sounds good. And it gives me a funny price. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound like a lot. What's the story? And I came in during rush hour, so maybe I'm going home. It's not rush hour. It's now 11 o'clock or something like that. And I didn't find out that I wasn't going home until I was in the Uber, and it said, take David to William H. Gray 30th Street Station, which is a train station, the main train station in Philadelphia. So I'm like, I said to the driver, I said, is that where you're taking me, to 30th Street Station? And he said, yeah, that's what you ordered. I have another event on Monday coming up for the University of the Arts. Again, same scenario. This class is designing, it's a museum, some sort of museum education class. I forget what its actual title is, but they were tasked with, their project for the semester was to create some accessibility feature for blind, visually impaired, or otherwise disabled folks to enjoy the museum more. And I went to, I don't even want to call it their alpha project, versions of their project, but I had gone about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and some of the stuff they came up with is just incredible. But I'm going again, and I wanted to make sure that I had the address to the University of the Arts in my Uber app so that I could just tap it when I'm done and, get the ride home. When I'm searching for it, and I go to the top one of my most recents, and I touch it, and it says one address, and then I swipe right once and it gets to the next address. And the third swipe down was 30th Street Station. And I'm like, okay, that's there. So I got to be careful with that. Swipe to the right again, and I get another address. And a second later, without touching the screen, it then goes back to 30th Street Station. I'm like, wait a minute, how did that do that? And now I'm starting to get an idea how I made that mistake that day. In the time it took me to hear what it said, and then for me to double tap, the focus changed back to 30th Street Station.
Exactly. That's what it sounded like to me. Yeah.
And I had the same issue with my alarm a few times when I had set it, especially, I want to say it was after iOS 15 or 15.1, whatever it was. And I was waking up at weird hours and I didn't know what was going on. So I carefully did it. My wife is watching me do it, and she saw it happen, and I heard it happen because I did it more slowly than I did previously. So I made sure it was going to be the correct time, or whatever went on happened. So yeah, it's just something that when I do my podcast, I always think of, well, if things don't go great, I have something to talk about. And I knew yesterday when I was done, or the other day when I was done talking to Bill, I knew, I said to my wife, after we went back into the exam room, I said to my wife, I said, well, at least I have a podcast title now, and I have a story to tell for this week's episode, more so than, hey, I went to my doctor and everything looked good after the surgery, and it's just, even when something goes not great, it's still something to talk about and give other people confidence to go out and do stuff. If you're blind or visually impaired, go ahead and give it a try. As my dad used to say, be careful, don't be afraid. And
yeah, that's good. That's a good.
And that's, I've always tried to do that. And there's things that kind of scare me. I hate crossing if you're in a town or a city where the streets really aren't like in a grid shape. It's maybe the roads curve a little bit and it's hard to judge where traffic is coming from. It kind of makes me nervous. But I still get out and about, and you got to go out and about because it makes you feel better to be out and doing something on your own. And it's so important to be independent and be able to do that and go and grab some coffee or a sandwich or pick up your prescription, whatever it is, to get out and do it. It's not always easy. In fact, a lot of times it's difficult because there are ways set up both at the drugstore or the coffee shop that make it more difficult for blind or visually impaired folks. But you got to give it a try and tell folks, hey, it would be a lot easier if you did things this way. And it doesn't cost anything more for you to do it this way. And why don't you give it a try and see if it helps? Obviously, when you're talking about a chain, if you're talking about a Starbucks or something like that, maybe you can get that one location to do something, but you're most likely not going to get the whole chain. But if it's a mom and pop or a local store, there's a lot of times you can do that.
Right. Absolutely. Sure. And that's really incredible. Have you ever had any international guests on your podcast? I've had many.
I've had, yes. And that's one of the reasons I want to do this business. I'm actually going to call it Blind Bosses or Blind Boss. I don't know which it is. It's going to be one or the other. I've talked to a couple of folks from India. One of them has an app, and I'm trying to recall. It was around a year ago. I had him on. His name is Pramit.
Yeah, Lowy Voice Control.
Yes, that's him. Yes,
yeah,
I had him on, and
he's
great. Talking to him, his business sense and my business sense were very aligned, and it was funny. Half a world away, how similar our thoughts were for businesses. And we talked for a long time after we got done recording and talking about, because he was going through it with his staff and I was going through it. My daughter, who lives in New York, she came home for the pandemic for what she thought was going to be a couple of weeks and was here, 18 months or something like that. So, and he was talking about his staff doing the same thing. He found them to be more productive because they all moved back home with their parents. The moms were cooking them dinner, so they didn't have to worry about dinner. And he's talking about how much more productive they were. They were working more hours a day because they didn't have to commute. And so I talked to him. I've talked to a few folks in Canada, Carrie and Brian Kajewski from Outlook on Radio Western. I talked to Emily Trepanier, blind snowboarder, which every time I think about, 57 years old I am. And if somebody told me to go right, I have a 50-50 shot of going the correct way. Somebody tells me to go left. So there is no way. And as she's telling me this, she's like, yeah, I have a coach. I'm not tethered. And they're just telling me in my earpiece, okay, you've got to go to the left. And I'm thinking to myself, if I were doing this and I'm going however fast you're going down the side of a mountain on a snowboard and somebody tells me to go to the left, I may go to the left, but there's a good chance I'll go to the right also. And who knows what's on the right. And so she's originally from Ontario. She lives out in BC now. And she was great to speak with. And I've talked to, what's his name? Party Gill from the UK. He is a member of the NFB in the UK, and it's not really associated with the National Federation of the Blind here in the US, but similar, and not the largest blindness organization in the UK. RNIB, of course, is. I've had him on, actually not on my podcast. He's been on White Canes Connect. And I think that's it. Everybody else. And I don't usually have guests. I maybe had a dozen guests over my 176 episodes. I don't know that I've had more than that. Might be a couple more, but probably around a dozen or so over the 3+ years.
Wonderful. That is really, really, really fascinating. It's interesting how we've both interviewed Pramit, and how interesting all of that is. Have you ever heard of Aaron's Opinion? I'm just purely curious when I reached out to you.
I hadn't. And as I told you in the email responding to you when you had contacted me, and I have to be honest with you, I guess you had called a few days after you had sent the contact form. I didn't see that email because I was so backed up I was laid up with the surgery. So I was staring at the ceiling for the first couple of days with the air bubble in my eye.
Right.
So I didn't really go through emails for a few days. So I didn't see the email right away. So when I got your voicemail, I thought, okay, I'm going to go look for that email from the contact form on the site. And then when I saw it, I said, oh, let me take a look. I'm sitting here and I'll listen to an episode or two and just get an idea. And as I told you in the email, when I was listening to Ryan's Window,
since I appreciate it, since you were so kind, why don't you tell people how you felt? Because you really touched me with your email. Why don't you regale us with your with your inspiration? Because that really touched me.
It's funny because I usually only listen to podcasts when I'm doing something else, washing the dishes, cleaning up, whatever. I don't listen when I'm sitting at my computer, primarily because when I'm sitting at the computer, I'm having to listen to, and that's else. Yeah. Right. And that's one of the things that kills me the most, I think, about losing enough vision where I can't zoom in to see and having to listen to everything. And so I thought, well, I'm going to search, and I did the search for your podcast, and I find it on Google, and it says Ryan's Window, and I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. And so I'm listening on, I guess it was, I don't know if it was Apple Podcasts on the internet. I did the Google search. It might have been right through Google. I don't remember exactly how it was. Expecting to listen to a few minutes of it just to get a general idea of your show. And I'm listening, and I'm getting more intrigued by what he's saying. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll listen a little longer. And I'm just sitting here and I'm listening at regular speed as you and I are speaking right now, which I never do. I always listen a little bit faster on, when I'm listening on my phone. And I'm thinking, I would have never guessed. And I thought, maybe it's time I should go to bed. I'm like, no, I've only got 15 minutes left. I'm just going to finish the episode because I got to hear how it ends. And I just loved it. And as I told you in the email, it was so touched. That story was so amazing. And
his life, Ryan Hansen, you're talking about. Yeah. His life has been, Ryan's Window. His life is basically, and I've interviewed, and there's more where that comes from. I interviewed someone, I'm not going to tell you who, only because I know you're going to keep listening to Aaron's opinion each week. But there's a guy, if you think Ryan Hansen's life was like a movie, trust me, I interviewed a guy whose life, literally, this other guy that I've interviewed, he basically was an actor in his own life's movie. So it gets worse. It gets better. Trust me. Okay. Yeah. Ryan Hansen's life has definitely been a movie. For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And like I told you in the email, it reminded me of the person who started You Can Give, Jimmy Boehm. And his story,
I didn't quite know who that was. I guess I forgot about that. I wasn't quite sure what that reference was at the end. But who are you talking about? I don't know.
His name is Jimmy Boehm, Boehm, and he has you can find him online at customcane.com, and custom is with a K, where he'll customize your cane, which is some of the stuff they do is very cool. Other things they do, I kind of cringed at. You can get little charms, for the handle. And I'm looking through the different options, and I don't know you, but I got from when I was in London 4 or 5 years ago, I got a Beefeater keychain that's a rubberized thing, because more times than not, it always hits me in the forehead or hits me in the eye. And I'm looking at some of these charms that they sell for the cane, and I notice a cross, and I'm thinking, oh my God, if that hits somebody in their eye. Again, I don't know how they attach it. I don't know if it's going to dangle from the end like my keychain. Maybe it's a charm and it goes higher up. But he also started a program initiative called You Can Give. And basically he collects old canes. When you're done with a cane, when you get a new one, what do you do with the old one? And he collects them if they need to be fixed up, whether the elastic inside needs to be replaced or bungee or whatever it is inside. He'll fix them up, and then they take them to all over the place. He's been to 20 different countries. And when we set up the interview with this guy, my co-host and co-producer, Lisa, set it up, and she's telling me, oh, we got Jimmy for this and blah, 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 blah. And I'm looking into him, and I see his video on YouTube about You Can Give. And I see about him with Custom Cane. And then he tells us his story about how he went blind. And it is just unreal. I pictured it in my head as he's telling me and Lisa this story. He was at a police checkpoint and they told him to pull to the side because his license had been suspended. And he panicked, so he steps on the gas and the police are chasing him. And then Lord. It had rained that day and he gets stuck in the mud and the police are all behind him, and he puts the SUV in reverse, and as soon as he put it in reverse, they all opened fire. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, the police shot him and that's how. Nope, he got away from that.
What?
And continued down the road.
Well, guys, so David, so you're going to put me in touch with him? Okay, right.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's I'm telling you.
So we don't want to tell anymore because we want to make sure that we get this. We got to make sure we get this character on here. I'm going to love that.
Yeah, I mean, it is just an incredible. I'm sure my mouth was on the floor as he's telling us this story of how he went blind and basically turned everything around by.
Yeah, I see what you mean now. I see what. I do see the connection. That's interesting.
Yeah, it just was a very similar story. Again, slightly different, but just incredible. Just incredible. You know, when all of it went down, and just a great story. And in fact, when that episode dropped, and I believe it's episode 27 of White Canes Connect, when that episode dropped, somebody who I know from Philadelphia, from a different NFB chapter, who's on this committee to help these university students with their accessibility museum thing, when I ran into her at the next event that we were looking at the projects, she said, I never knew anything about that with Jimmy. I never had any idea. She's been working with this guy for a couple of years, collecting canes for him. And she hears the story. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And it's just a wild story. It's just a wild story.
But, that's my sense of humor. That is hilarious.
Yeah, it is just crazy. And and I couldn't believe it. So I'm always intrigued by who Lisa finds and gets. She'll say, hey, do you want to get this guy or this girl for the podcast? And I'm like, if you think they're good, just get them. She's in charge of the guests and all that stuff. I take care of the editing. I take care of the posting the episodes and things like that. And she does that other stuff. And we're a great team for that. And we have one more person that sometimes also hosts when Lisa's not available, because she's also a writer and does all sorts of great stories, some blindness related, some not. It's a great teamwork for us going on there with the three of us. And it's an amazing thing when we think of everything that we do with that, with just the three of us. So that one actually had a much better, White Canes Connect had a much better start than I'm sure when you and I started our podcast, because we had a built-in audience, because it's presented by the NFB of Pennsylvania. You already have all the members and people who subscribe to the NFB of PA listservs and things like that. So it's just, I'm just so happy how, we're 30 episodes in now, and that's just going so much better out of the gate than my podcast did, and probably going to eclipse the numbers that I get within the next year or so. Again, because we've got that built-in audience, and everybody in the NFB of PA has, hey, did you hear the podcast we have? And blah, 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 blah. So sometimes it limits us with, could we get somebody from, AFB to talk? We would not do that, because it's not, we'd get somebody outside of anything. We've had people on from Envision, and we're trying to get someone on from IRA to talk about their products and things like that. But to have another, it would almost be like getting a competitor on, although I guess everybody's a competitor and everybody's a colleague at the same time.
My theory about this, you're right. It would actually be in your favor. I'm only giving my opinion. It would be in your favor to have competitors of competitive organizations on your podcast. When you create competition, you create success.
Right.
And that's just how it works. So I want people to compete with me. I want people to compete with me for guests and stories. And I want a good podcaster is open to healthy and productive competition. So I understand why you can't do such a thing and have competitor companies on White Canes Connect. It makes sense. The legalese side makes sense, but any other reason would tell me do it, because we need competition.
Right. And that's, and again, and that's the beauty, like you have with your show and I have with my show, we can bring on whoever we want. We can say whatever we want. And that is just so beautiful to not be handcuffed by with what we say or what we don't say. And obviously there's some things that you don't want to get into with folks, but on the other hand, we can if we want to. We don't have a boss that's going to say, "Hey, you shouldn't have done that," or whatever. But and that's one of the things when I was in school for communications and thinking, okay, when you get a job at a radio station or a TV station, you can't do this, or you got to do that. You're always going to have bosses, and you and I are the boss of our own show. And that's, we get on the guests we want. We're completely the ones to control everything. And that's a great thing. Just like you do when you have a blog over being in a newspaper or some other digital media type of setup. Absolutely.
Well, David, I just want to, walk towards an ending of another absolutely beautiful episode here on Aaron's Opinion. I really cannot thank you enough. Of course, I thought, oh God, I'm not going to get into that story because then I'll laugh so hard I won't be able to finish my own episode. Anyway, guys, so for the listener at home, there's an inside joke going on right here that you aren't going to get. I might talk about it in the recordings in the intro or outro if I can manage to tell it without cracking up and laughing door when I'm doing my own intro. Well, David, I cannot thank you enough. I just want you to know I'm loving your content, really like your approach for things. But, I love to end every episode of Aaron's Opinion. And since you listened to an entire episode of Aaron's Opinion, I'm 100% sure of it. You know how I like to end. So I always like to say, David, thanks for joining us today. You are forever welcome here on Aaron's Opinion. But of course, do you want to ask me one question to really make me sweat to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster? You knew that was coming. Go for it.
I did know it was coming. And, it's funny that you mentioned that as you're talking about the inside joke between us. I just thought I've got to have that guy on, whether it's on my podcast or White Canes Connect, because it will, at least on my end, it will take care of, which guy is which. So hopefully you can tell your listeners about that.
Okay, so you realize what pickle you're putting me into now. That means that now I have to figure out who that other guy is. I have to contact it. You see, there's this other imposter, and he has this other podcast, and I thought you were him. Okay, so we got to fix this now. Do you realize I'm a busy man? I'm a teacher and a talk show host. Do you realize what conundrum you've caused here? Now I have to figure out this guy from 13 years ago. No, not the other guy that went to a hospital 13 years ago. The other guy from 13 years ago. God, this is a comedy routine.
Now, I wonder if he actually does have a podcast. Now that you mentioned that, I wonder if he does. That would be even funnier. I can teach tech, maybe.
Can you just ask a question so I can end the episode? You're really, people are going to be concerned about this. Can you just do me a solid, okay? Just ask your question, give the outro track, and then I'll have to go eat my snack and have a drink on the rocks or something, because this is just getting stressful. What's your question?
The question I have for you, knowing now about your French connection, as it were, would you ever consider living in France?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. Only because one of the real reasons is because, David, I've spent a lot of time overseas. I'll tell you that although we have a lot of problems here in the United States for us blind people, and I also know. God, this is so. I can't wait to tell you guys in the audience what's going on. So. And we also have a problem with it's also hard for blinks. I'll tell you, no country on the planet is greater to be sighted, blind, or blind There's no country that's more perfect for sighted people, blind people, or blinks than the United States. I promise you that. Could I live in France? I mean, do I speak French fluently? Yeah, like well enough, yes. But it's just it creates and probably even better than I, with all the different bureaucracies. I'm not going to get into a big social security, government, politics type of thing. It creates a lot of bureaucracy when you live in another country, and it kind of creates a lot of challenge. But I have interviewed two French people. I've done an episode in French, in my second language, before. And I've interviewed a person from France who's sighted, it's a sighted person who owns a company. Anyway, a really good question. Anyway, where can someone find your podcast? I can't.
I can't see you.
There you go.
Any of the podcast directories, I can't see you. It sounds like a whole sentence, but it's only 7 characters long. ICANTCU. You can find me at ican'tseeyou.com. I'm on all the socials. David Benge is my handle on all of them, including Racket, which is funny because it's kind of like an audio version of TikTok, but the app is not 100% accessible. So I was very dismayed when I started to do my first, I guess they're called Rackets. And I thought, this is going to be a great thing. All my blind friends are going to get on here. It's not like Clubhouse. It's where you can post I think it's up to 90 seconds. You can post 90 seconds of an audio clip. You don't have to be live. It's not live. You have to record it on the app. You can't record something. You couldn't take a snippet from your podcast, for example. I mean, you could, if you could just play it on a device and have your phone recording it so you could use it. But at David Benge on any of the socials, you can certainly reach out there, or you can reach me at ican'tseeyou@gmail.com. And I do want to take a minute to thank you for having me on, Aaron. This has been a lot of fun, and I really do appreciate it. And I'll have to have you. I'm excited to talk more about France with you, and more about blindness and blinks and and anything else that we could come up with. So I have to have you on, whether it's going to be on I Can't See You, or even better on White Canes Connect, with the idea of getting more folks into podcasting.
I would be, you know what, guys, I would be honored to help all of you get into podcasting. So thanks so much. David, how do I end an episode? What's my slogan? So thanks so much, everybody. What do I say when I end an episode?
Help one person today. To help 100 tomorrow. I don't remember exactly what the line was.
So close. My last guest got it. No problem, David. David, been a pleasure. Stay safe out there, everybody around the world. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. Another great episode. As I like to say, we'll be back next week, same time, same place. Help one person today. Help 1 million people tomorrow.